Hello, Michigan Realtors, and welcome back to the Letter of the Law. In our last installment, we focused on considerations that listing brokerages should keep top of mind as offers of compensation move off the MLS in the coming months. Today, we're shifting our focus to the buyer side of the transaction. Consider this hypothetical. Buyer Smith asks Realtor A to show them the home at 123 Main Street. When Realtor A arranges a showing, she is told that the listing broker is offering a specific amount of a cooperating split. Buyer Smith submits an offer through Realtor A, which is accepted. The sale closes. Under the new rules, Realtor A cannot collect the offered cooperating commission offered by the listing broker unless she has a buyer agency contract with Buyer Smith that provides for that specific amount of a commission or a greater amount that the offer of compensation will offset. Regardless of the source of the payment, a buyer's broker cannot collect more than the amount stated in the agreement between the buyer and the buyer broker. The contract becomes pivotal, as it is no longer the case that a buyer brokerage can earn commissions simply by establishing that they were the, quote, procuring cause of a transaction. With the forthcoming August 17th practice changes, let's review the new normal from the buyer's agent's perspective. Consideration number 1. You may not show a home to a buyer until you have a written contract with that buyer. It does not need to be an agency contract, but it does need to spell out the total compensation that you will receive for the service provided, regardless of the source of payment. Number 2. You may enter into a non-agency home tour agreement in which you agree to show the home to the buyer for a fee or for no consideration. Thereafter, if the buyer decides to work with you to purchase the home, you will need to enter into an agency agreement that discloses the amount that you will be paid. This can be an exclusive agency agreement that covers any property that the buyer buys, or can be limited to a particular property. Number 3. You cannot enter into a contract with a buyer that says that you will be paid whatever the listing broker or seller offers. It must be a stated amount. Number 4. If the buyer wants the seller to agree to pay all or some of the amount the buyer has agreed to pay the buyer's broker, that provision should be included in the purchase agreement. This is no different than a provision that requires the seller to pay for the buyer's title insurance. Number 5. If the seller has indicated that it is willing to pay seller concessions, which could be applied toward the stated amount that the buyer has agreed to pay the buyer's broker, again, those terms must be spelled out in the purchase agreement. A buyer cannot simply rely upon the fact that seller concessions were mentioned in the MLS listing. An MLS invitation to ask for seller concessions is not binding. It will need to be formalized in the purchase agreement. Number 6. If the listing broker's offer of compensation is greater than the stated amount in the buyer-broker contract, you are not entitled to the additional amount. Number 7. Your contract with the buyer can say that the buyer gets a credit against the stated amount in the buyer's broker contract for any payments made to you by the listing broker and/or seller. And number 8, lastly, but certainly not least, if the listing broker has advertised that it is offering a cooperating commission on a particular home, and you have a buyer for that home, the commission agreement should be spelled out in a separate written agreement between the two brokerages. Under current Michigan law, agreements between brokers to share a commission are not required to be in writing. But as a buyer's broker, you will want a written agreement whereby the listing broker confirms your relationship with this particular buyer as it relates to this particular property. In other words, the listing broker will be contractually agreeing to the fact that it is you that have accepted the listing broker's offer of compensation. This formality is a best practice for both buyer brokers and listing brokers. Thanks again for tuning in. We will continue to provide more analysis on the forthcoming practice changes. If you have not already done so, please register for the upcoming broadcast event on June 20th entitled The Conversation. During the broadcast, President Sandy Smith will engage in a candid discussion with Michigan Realtors legal counsel, exploring some of the most commonly asked questions pertaining to the settlement. Register today and submit your own question to be addressed during the event. We hope to see you there.